IVM.
Welcome to the show. This round is on me. Today, I have two guests who are fellow podcasters and whom I met as a guest on the first season of their podcast, Feeding 10 Billion. My first guest is Ramya Ramamurthy, communications specialist at the Good Food Institute, India. Ramya is a media professional with 18 years of work experience spanning across the gamut from print media to broadcast television news, documentary filmmaking, and digital media. She's worked with established media brands like CNBC TV 18 and on films for channels like National Geographic Channel and Star World. She's also a published author with her first book titled Rebuild: How Brands in India Overcame Crisis and Emerged Stronger, Better, Wiser. I think that's probably something we should all be picking up right about now.
Talk about topical branding.
Yeah, forward thinking, Ramya.
Yeah.
My second guest for today is Varun Deshpande, Managing Director for India at the Good Food Institute, where he is focused on building the future of food by working with scientists, foundations, governments, entrepreneurs, and corporations to advance the plant-based and cultivated protein sector. Varun spent several formative years studying chemical and biomedical engineering at Carnegie Mellon University. He then went on to work on implementing digital health in India and the US, helping vulnerable populations through care coordination and a systems approach to healthcare. Their mission now, simply put, is to build a more healthy, sustainable, and just global food system starting right here in India. Thank you both for coming on my show. There's so much I'd like to know from both of you about plant-based diets and cell-based foods. So let's dive right in. Can you tell me a bit more about the Good Food, about what the Good Food Institute is all about, where and when it started, and what you're doing in India? Both of you. So Varun, do you want to start?
Yeah, firstly, Gauri, thank you so much for having us. We're very excited to be here. And when everything opens up again post-COVID, I think you can actually take us out and the round will actually be on you when we do go out and hang out.
You're done.
But generally, yeah, so we are incredibly excited about this mission, as you know. What the Good Food Institute does globally is we're a network of nonprofits. So we have offices in the US, which is where we started in 2016, and India, Brazil, Israel, Europe out of the UK and the EU, East Asia out of Hong Kong, Singapore, and other places. And we're expanding everywhere. And our goal is to accelerate the protein transition. That is the adoption and the development of plant-based, cultivated or cell-based and fermentation-derived meat, egg, and dairy foods. The reason for this is very simple. Industrial animal agriculture is breaking the planet, right? And this isn't really a secret anymore. People have been talking about this for a very long time. We're currently living through a pandemic, the likes of which are exacerbated or the risk of which is increased by the consumption of industrial, large-scale animal foods. Industrial animal agriculture, if you look at it, it causes more climate change than all the emissions of all transportation on the earth combined. And people have been saying this for decades, right? All of these things that I'm describing to you, the environmental problems, the public health issues, the food security problems. For example, you have to grow all of these crops to feed to all of these animals in order to eat a small portion of the animal as food. And I'm talking really about large-scale industrial farming, right? I'm not talking about small-scale regenerative stuff. At a large scale, that actually really competes with humans for food security. So all of these things, as I said, have been known for a very, very long time, but nothing has been possible up until now in terms of getting people to switch away from meat, eggs, and dairy because those foods are delicious, they're culturally entrenched, people want to eat them. In many places, like in India, they are politically and culturally entrenched, and it's very important for people to have their meat. So what we do is we focus on using food science, new approaches and markets, and working with the really exciting entrepreneurs, scientists, governments, pretty much everyone who can help us accelerate this new supply of products that taste, smell, sizzle, cook, feel the same as meat, eggs, and dairy. So people are just making a simple switch and not a sacrifice.
Right. I mean, that pretty much, I think, sums it up. But Ramya, anything you want to add?
I think this whole podcast is just going to be me going what Varun said. But I just want to add to what he said, because he did cover a lot of ground there. But essentially what we're doing, and what our podcast is also titled, is Feeding 10 billion. We're going to number nearly 10 billion, 9.8 billion by the year 2050. The way we make our food right now, which is grow a bunch of crops, feed that to animals, and then kill those animals and eat a portion of those animals for our protein, is not going to be a viable option for all 10 billion of us at that time. It's not viable right now. And the fact is that we can try telling people not to eat meat or go vegan or go vegetarian, and the science around meat being bad for the environment is proven. But people don't make their choices based on that. People might say they care about health, environment, and sustainability, but what they really care about when they go out and buy foods and eat them is taste, price, and convenience, as you said.
Sure.
And we have to create a system where the default choice is a better choice. And one way of increasing efficiency, making sure we have access to foods that taste the same or better, cost the same or less, and are accessible to everybody, is through alternative protein, or what we call smart protein in India. And apart from the environmental angle and the fact that we have to feed all these people, there are also risks with the way we make our food, right, which are becoming imminent as we are learning through the pandemic, and also in terms of not just zoonotic diseases, but antibiotic resistance. A vast majority of the world's antibiotics are fed to animals, and then we eat those animals, and the risk of developing resistance to superbugs is going to be one of the biggest health concerns right alongside climate change going forward. So, the fact that we could graze our knee somewhere, cut ourselves somewhere, and not live because of this sort of resistance is a future we don't want to even contemplate. So I think the problems that we're trying to solve encompass all of these things, and the solution is very elegant. It's very simple. It's just make foods that are delicious and tasty and that give us the nutrition we need, but out of plants, out of cells, or out of other ingredients made through processes like fermentation.
Sure. I mean, like you said, to get people to even think about changing that choice of dietary preference, you have to provide the alternative. Otherwise, you can't just say become vegetarian or vegan or whatever. I think, you have to provide alternatives to people's existing dietary preferences as well. And that's presumably what this is about, providing alternatives which are made in a more sustainable and, long-term viable way. So, I've heard you mention this in your podcast about, the sort of the next food revolution is rethinking the future of protein, and which is plant-based and cell-based. And I remember actually it was on your show that I first heard the terms plant-based and cell-based. So I'm kind of going to say this for the benefit of our audience, that could you kind of explain that a little more? Like, what are these terms, plant-based and cell-based? Varun, do you want to sort of clarify that?
Yeah, it's super simple. So, I mean, the entire concept, the entire endeavor here is, as Ramya said, and as I said earlier, to give people something that tastes the same or better and costs the same or less. So many early innovators in this space, like a person named Ethan Brown in the US, he analyzed what was in animal meat. And this is an idea that's existed for a long time. And he said, look, this stuff is made from, that is meat, animal meat is made from lipids, minerals, amino acids, all those things are available in plants, right? And so he took some research that was happening at the University of Minnesota and other places with pea protein made from yellow peas, and he put together a product that was made from plants, but which tastes, cooks, sizzles, and has basically the cultural and the sensory resonance of a beef burger, a meat. And that's what has become the category of plant-based meat. So products that are made from plants or crop ingredients, like your beetroot juice, pea protein, coconut oil, and we'll get to the ingredients later, of course, but which taste, smell, sizzle, cook exactly like their animal-derived counterparts, right? And this category is exploded all over the world. It's mainly derived from that idea of burgers, because Americans eat a lot of burgers.
Right.
In fact, Americans eat 3 beef burgers a week on average, which is just That's the problem that we're trying to solve, right? Like that industrial scale, like really large scale
consumption.
It's cuckoo for many reasons. It's really bad for the planet, really bad for their health, etc. In fact, if you swapped out one of those 3 beef burgers a week for a Beyond Burger, it would be the equivalent of taking 12.2 million cars off the road or powering 2.3 million additional homes, right? This is a no-brainer. Let's do this.
Wow. But cell-based meat is, unless you were just about to explain that my understanding is that it actually is derived from animal cells.
Yeah, exactly. So, this is food, and meat is a $4, $6, $7 trillion industry if you include seafood. So meat is extremely large, and it's going to take a lot of approaches, just like different approaches are taken to currently manufacture meat. There's different types of meat that are manufactured currently. So for people who insist that their meat must come from an animal, and there will always be people like that, there has been this idea for a long time to just cut out the middle animal. So instead of growing a full chicken, which is this very intensive process where chicken grows in 45 days, you're stuffing it full of grain, it's growing to a certain size. Those chickens have also been bred over many generations, and we've hit their biological limit in terms of how much we can feed them and how big they can get. So the reason that they are inefficient, right? It all derives from this simple truth. We eat animals who eat plants. And so instead of growing these feathers and beaks and talons and all, most people in the world do not eat those things, right? So even talons, they're sometimes eaten, but the vast majority of meat that's eaten is not, is just the chicken breast or the thigh or whatever. So the idea here is let's farm the cells directly instead of farming, that is raising and slaughtering the chicken in this very inefficient process. So cell-based meat is exactly that. You take the cells of a chicken, you give it the nutrients it gets inside the body of a chicken, and then it grows over time to be a chicken breast, right? Similarly, salmon, pomfret, pork, whatever it is that you're trying to create. And there are about now 55 plus companies around the world. It's a very accelerated timeline for what's come together here, because it has all the same advantages again. It's just a different way of bringing things together. So these are the 2 main categories. And there's a bunch of other things that are involved, like ancient technologies like fermentation that have been around for a very long time. So it's an incredibly exciting landscape. There's a lot going on.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at this from the perspective of nutrition, right? Because that's a big part of why we eat what we eat. And, I've heard of cell-based meat being referred to as clean meat now for the, very reason that it's cleaner for the environment, for your body, etc. Essentially overall more beneficial to you. So, does this alternative also give you all the nutrients that you would get in consuming meat in the traditional way?
Yeah, so I mean, with plant-based meat, because you're making it exactly what you want to make it. If you look at the labels, the nutrition labels for a lot of these things in terms of the content, like Impossible Foods is another company, just like Beyond Meat that I mentioned earlier. Impossible Foods, they have an Impossible Pork now, which is coming out soon, which apparently tastes amazing. It tastes exactly like pork, but it's made from plants. It has fewer calories, more protein, less saturated fat, and it's just generally a better macronutrient profile. They've also, of course, kept in all the micronutrients, right? Like iron, folic acid. In fact, what's a really interesting angle here, and Ramya mentioned it earlier in the conversation, is we are doing this also coming from a background of, I come from a background of nutrition, right? So, for example, when we talk to, or health at least, when we talk to people in the government here, we do talk to them about the possibility of this area being a great driver of nutrients, especially micronutrients at scale. So can we have these fortified plant-based meat products or egg or dairy or whatever may be the case, and have them be, shelf stable, ship them from Maharashtra all over the country, target things like iron deficiency anemia, folic acid deficiencies. There's a lot of possibilities here. With cell-based, because it's biologically meat, it has everything in it that meat has. So in fact, if you were allergic to a specific type of meat, like a shellfish or something, you would not be able to eat the cell-based equivalent of it, because it would literally be... It
replicates it that closely.
Yeah, so, like Shiok Meats is one company in Singapore started by an Indian founder who's only making shellfish, only making crustaceans rather. So crab, prawn, and then eventually lobster, starting with prawn, that is shrimp. If you were allergic to shrimp, you would not be able to eat their meat.
But, I mean, so while it replicates everything good about that meat, does it also contain I mean, I've heard about it sort of one sort of point of view, which is that it's high in saturated fats, for example. Is that true? Is that sort of obviously that's not going to be good for you, but is that a correct sort of almost fallout of doing something that's also good for you in so many other ways?
Interesting. So I think the saturated fat thing might be coming from plant-based, because some of the companies use coconut oil as their fat source in plant-based. So like an Impossible Foods or a Beyond Meat would use coconut oil in their burgers. And I think the science is mixed on coconut oil specifically, but because you're using whatever it is that you want to make it, you could easily swap out coconut oil for something else, right? So like if the science said that saturated fat, and equally it doesn't have any cholesterol, right? Because on the plant-based side, there is no cholesterol in plants. In cell-based,
but what about in the cell-based? Yeah,
it would contain what meat contains. I mean, I think that there will be approaches over time to make it in a way that takes out all the bad stuff that's in meat also. But initially, the goal is just let's make meat in a different way on the cell-based side.
And I just want to add here that in cell-based, what it doesn't contain is obviously like fecal matter contamination or antibiotics or any of the other stuff that is in our meat right now. In fact, Rachel Conrad from Impossible Foods tweeted that if you want to talk about ingredients, ground beef from a cow has a list of ingredients that's longer than anything else. It's just that when we buy it, we don't look at it as, it having all these ingredients. So cell-based meat will be made the same way as meat in an animal, but obviously outside the animal. And it will not have the problems of industrial animal agriculture.
But will it possibly have the problems of processed food because it's being made in a laboratory and it's not, maybe animal protein, which potentially has it has a shorter shelf life, whereas I'm assuming that, lab-made food has a longer shelf life, by definition of it being processed. So does it have sort of any side effects of it being processed? Because obviously people are moving towards, eating whole foods as opposed to processed foods. So
So that's a really good question. I think the answer again is slightly different for plant-based than for cell-based. On the plant-based side, all the products themselves originally were set up to do this, like let's perfectly replicate the taste of meat. And I think over time, their labels are getting what is known as cleaner. And like you said, there is this large movement in food, whether you're eating packaged foods or not, to get towards a cleaner label. And that is colliding with our industry. It's evolving extremely rapidly. So you're seeing next generation products where instead of 12 ingredients, they have 7 ingredients on the label, right? So like you're already seeing that happen. And companies are, the entrepreneurs themselves are smart and they want to solve a problem in the world. They don't want to, they don't want to be left behind. So they definitely understand that that's where food is going in general. On the cell-based side, just to address one thing, it wouldn't be grown in a lab at scale, right? It would be manufactured outside. It would be in a manufacturing facility. So the process actually looks very similar to stuff we all know and love, like beer. So like when we go out and you're going to get the next round for us.
Yeah, I've heard of these, what are they called? Meat breweries. I've actually heard of this.
Exactly. Yeah. So that is actually what it's going to be like. So let's say 20, 30 years from now, when we do get that corner craft brewery beer, it will be like a beer and a sausage that was also brewed on the premises, which is really, really cool and interesting. So on the whole, it's the process looks very similar to like a beer or an industrial scale manufacturing of a yogurt. And as Ramya said, it's a huge advantage because right now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been multiple outbreaks of avian flu and African swine fever in India. All right. Farmers have had to dump 4,000, 6,000 chickens at a time. Okay, that's a travesty for the farmer, and it's really alarming in terms of consumer welfare and food safety, right? So that's what you won't get from this system because you'll be able to monitor everything in the same in a way that you simply cannot do with every chicken or every cow or every pig. The reason that we get antimicrobial resistance is because you can't monitor these things, and so they're fed antibiotics, in their feed like candy. And that's a pressure, that's an economic pressure on the producer, right? So what I'm trying to say is not to demonize the producer. It's saying, let's offer alternatives to everyone across the supply chain as well as the consumer.
Right.
I just want to add that there is also some degree of, the science around processing is perhaps like conflated in binaries of like natural and whole foods versus processed. Pasteurization is a form of processing. Yogurt is a highly processed food. There are, obviously processing is a part of a lot of the foods we eat, including salt, in our everyday life. But we don't see them as processed in the same way as we see, foods offered in the fast food format or the QSR format as processed. So there's also a perception issue here because it's burgers that are being offered as plant-based meats. You tend to see them as unhealthy because they're appearing in a junk food format. In India, it will obviously not be burgers. We don't eat as many burgers as our Western counterparts. If it's going to be something like a biryani or a keema or a tikka, I wonder if the same binary will apply.
Right. No, I mean, that's a great point. I think perception is everything. I
should say, sorry. So I don't want to harp on this point, but I do think it's also worth noting that to Ramya's point about biryanis and tikkas and keemas, like biryani is a juggernaut in India, right? So
I'm going to come to that because that's something that we talked about, I think, when we spoke as well on your show, but I'm going to come back to that.
Okay.
Just sort of sticking, you mentioned obviously I think the most popular companies that everyone's heard of is Impossible Foods, Beyond Burgers, etc. And they are now available in the big burger chains in the US and now I believe even in China. And obviously on supermarket shelves, etc. So, what's the response been to the introduction of these products on the menus? And has there been a growing shift towards eating these products? Is it more? Is it converting people who were previously eating meat to eating these, or is it new? A new audience that previously kind of shunned that whole idea of eating, sort of fast food type meat, because now this is a better product, and because they understand the benefits of it. Who's the audience that it's kind of attracting, and what's the sort of response been like?
Yeah, I mean, at the outset, let me state this is absolutely the infancy. So this is all kind of early data. We're talking about a decades-long journey, but all the early data indicates, it's very optimistic in the sense of having the impact that they want to have. 90+% of Impossible Burgers, let's say from Burger King, which has 7,200 locations in North America, are meat eaters. 90% plus of those eaters that are eating Impossible Whoppers there, right? And in fact, the fact that the other chain with the yellow golden arches has not yet launched a product broadly in the US has been a big problem for them. Burger King literally had a sales lift, I believe, a sales swing over McDonald's of 10% in a year simply because of this one product, right? So as far as the response is concerned, pretty much everywhere you look, you mentioned China. There were chicken nuggets that were tried in China by Cargill, right. The Beyond Burger that was tried in China. It's lines around the block, every single place. KFC, which has made chicken the same way for like 100 years, right, is launching Beyond Meat chicken nuggets. Lines around the block, selling out in 22 minutes instead of the days that they expected. This is like a standard story every time stuff is released, right? And it goes to show that actually the limits to the industry at this point are the fact that it requires far more players to enter it. The demand has far outstripped the supply. And it's just a phenomenon right now.
But then why do we see the traditional form being served, continue to be served alongside? So for example, a Burger King, like why would you still have the alternative? Why would you have both if this is clearly what is being, what is in demand?
Yeah, because I mean, these are massive industries that will take time. This is going to be phased, right? And in fact, you want that. Like we want this to be, no one's coming here trying to say like, we want to absolutely disrupt everything. What I think, at least from our perspective, what we would like to happen is a steady transition and a transformation rather than a disruption, because I think that we need to bring everyone into the future of food. So you can have at the same table a family that would have otherwise eaten elsewhere that is now eating at Burger King because the one vegan or vegetarian in the family is able to eat there. And that's what Burger King wants, right? So good for them. I think that's what will continue happening. You mentioned, in a lot of these other places. So in Singapore, Impossible Foods was in 140 restaurants within 4 months of launch. And it wasn't just fast food, right? It was high-end $27 burger at whatever the name of that place is, Potato Head, I think, in Singapore. And then also like a street side thing, Impossible Wellington at Gordon Ramsay's restaurant. So it was a bunch of different approaches, and it's super interesting. It's not just burgers anymore for these companies too. And 2020 is turning into the chicken phenomenon. So we're very excited about all of this.
Right. So, I mean, but do you think one of the sort of barriers to entry is the fact that it is more expensive than, regular meat?
Yeah.
I almost feel like it's the new organic. So organic's kind of becoming more mainstream now because people are more aware and educated about the, health benefits of eating organic food, free range, organic, etc. And I feel like now this is, where organic was sort of 15 years ago as being considered sort of elitist and, appealing to a very small minority.
So except for that last point, I do agree with everything you said, because the last point I don't think is true anymore, because when these companies launched, we talked about this on the episode that we did with you on our podcast, Feeding 10 Billion, where we talked about how they launched with Chris Cosentino and David Chang and all of these other folks in the US. And then, very quickly, within 6 months, they were in White Castle with Impossible Sliders, for example. So, and I was specifically referring to Impossible Foods there. So I think that broadly it is, while it is still slightly more premium in the fast food setting than the regular fast food burger, a lot of that is a determination that's been made by the chain that's serving it, because they see this as an opportunity to charge a little bit more for something that's a little sexier currently.
Right?
Over time, that'll get normalized. But it goes back to your question about why hasn't everything switched over already? We need to do a lot more work to get every type of meat that's possible to eat, that's widely eaten, the plant-based or the cell-based version that tastes the same or better and costs the same or less. There's a lot of work remaining.
Sure. No, I think where I was coming from was that, in a burger joint, would they still have both options available? Why not, if there is a product available that replaces an existing product, why not replace it as opposed to have it alongside? And whether price was one of the factors that, was making them still continue with the sort of traditional format.
I just want to add here, that that's an interesting question. But the thing is, a lot of these consumption patterns are entrenched. And like Varun said, the way these meats are made are entrenched. Like the supply chain for the ingredient used in plant-based meats, yellow pea protein, is not established as far or as deep as traditional animal protein. So it's going to take time to switch over from these sort of supply chains and bring those costs down to really achieve price parity. But it's interesting to note that the consumers trying these plant-based products are not vegans or vegetarians. They are meat eaters. They are swapping out one of those 3 burgers they eat every week for a plant-based one. And the repeat value, like the number of consumers going back and trying them again, is what we need to watch to ensure that these things grow in, popularity and demand.
Yeah, that it's not a trend, but it's here to stay.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. And it's also how it's served, right? Like if you went to like a Michelin star restaurant and it was served with like, Muhammara and some exotic sauce, and, that's going to drive the cost up. Whereas now, because it's going through the QSR route, you're able to find, these products at a much cheaper, more accessible rate. So where, traditional meat would be at $3 a pound, Beyond Meat is retailing at $8 a pound right now. So it's come down drastically from what it was even a year or two prior, and it's only going to come down further.
Right. And what's really interesting, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say on the production side, I think COVID-19 is going to do a lot to change at least the thinking on this, because you're seeing a lot of slaughterhouses and large production places in the US on meat, and even in Europe now it started happening, just become amplification points for the disease, right?
Absolutely,
and this is for various reasons. The conditions are not fantastic, right? And so you have the increased risk of it because you're around essentially things that can become vectors of transmission of the disease. But also it's a concentrated system. So you have a lot of people that are crammed into a space, and these slaughterhouses and all of that stuff. So overall, I think that a lot of things will get thought through a little bit and revisited, and it's possible that it will accelerate because these are all going to be, quote, stranded assets, like, a Cargill or anyone that runs these what are known as concentrated animal feeding operations or factory farms, right? They will have to look at this and say, wait, if people are rethinking the entire animal protein production system, why don't we just now, at this point, rethink our strategy, diversify more, invest more in plant proteins, drive down the price of that, and just look into 20 years from now instead of starting another factory that just looks slightly different than the factory that we've had all this time.
No, I mean, you're right. I think COVID is going to be an important pivot point for a lot of, companies that are in the sort of meat dairy business. And it's funny that you mentioned Cargill, because I was just reading up about how they have actually invested in this alternative as well. So, it's interesting that they're kind of doing almost these contradictory yet parallel, yet sort of complementary businesses in parallel, because I guess they're trying to sort of see, have their hand in both pies and slowly kind of shift the balance based on the consumer response. So that's exactly what I found quite interesting. And I think I heard someone sort of talking about this, that, is it actually correct to refer to cell-based meats as meat? Can you actually call it meat? And it was interesting that a lot of the meat companies, or the companies sort of in these animal agriculture, are not really opposing it, because they're the ones actually invested in a lot of these alternative cell-based formats. So it's not really in the interest to classify it other than meat as well. So I think it's definitely interesting times to see who's really backing this and who's sort of supporting this industry to move forward. Let's talk a bit about India more specifically. Are we likely to see this product in India anytime soon?
Yeah, we'll see. So we were expecting multiple product launches across the spectrum, mainly on plant-based, of course, because that's easier to get moving and get to market than cell-based, which is kind of taking a biotech process that's existed for some time and then scaling it up to food levels, right? So with plant-based foods across meat and eggs, of course, there are a bunch of plant-based dairies already on the market. So plant-based milks already on the market. And you may have seen that Epigamia just launched a plant-based yogurt, which I do think they'll scale up. They might drop the price over time, and it's a good product. I've tried it. I think everyone has at this point that's interested in this. But on the plant-based meat and egg side, we were expecting multiple launches this year. COVID-19 has thrown that back, because what we might want is for many of these folks to launch through food service, right? And we talked about this, Gauri, which was the crux of our conversation actually on Feeding 10 Billion is, chefs will want to work with this stuff, see how it performs, see whom they can market it to, see how people are responding to it. And then the entrepreneur gets a signal back and, can do tastings and things like that. I think that's been thrown back by 6 months, 8 months. We've had very exciting news that came out a couple of days ago that we've been working with Ritesh and Janelia Deshmukh to put out, products in this space. And again, we were very excited to build a partnership between them and one of the ingredients players so they could have an accelerated path to market. So I think 2021, we'll see multiple product launches. They'll take the form that they have taken internationally, which is like, maybe there'll be a restaurant, like, for example, The Table, just pulling one out of my head.
No pressure.
Yeah. And then, there'll be a plant-based egg or a plant-based meat, a kebab, a keema, a biryani, whatever. And then it'll be a really exciting tasting with like test consumers, maybe journalists, and you'll see the hype getting built up over time more and more, which is exciting.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, it's definitely interesting times, but India is an agricultural nation, and the Indian masses have always lived off the land. So coming to this consumer perspective that you're talking about with restaurants, how do you think that you can convince Indian farmers to shift to an off-the-shelf product? And similarly, meat eaters to shift to sort of cell-based protein. So, Ramya, I'm guessing this is a lot to do with communication and education. So, how do you sort of see this happening in a place, in a country like India?
I think what we're trying to do is also demonstrate value for not just the end consumer, but for the producers, including farmers, in industry like this, and we have the opportunity in India to actually leverage our indigenous crops, right? We have relentlessly optimized crops like rice and wheat in India to the point where those are one of the cash crops, or the most lucrative crops that you can grow. But there are lots of similar crops that are native to India, like say millets or chickpeas, that are going to be very useful in a plant-based food sector that have not been optimized to the same extent. So there is great value, in fact, for farmers to sort of build those value chains, offer end products for their crops that could be sold much higher than what's currently being sold. And obviously, there is some interest among consumers also to eat healthy and eat more nutritive sort of Indian products. So I think the marketing and consumer awareness has to focus on not just the health aspect, which we are becoming more health aware, but also about taste, which is what we really care about, and price. Right. It's always going to be taste, price, and convenience. We've always believed that, and to market it so that we understand it. So when you market a tikka, it has to be marketed as something that could be used in a recipe, for instance. So say this is a plant-based tikka that could be used like a chicken tikka. So you contextualize it, you offer ways in which it could be used. You sort of create that sort of base for consumers to try it once, and then that adoption trickles down to people who may not be the early adopters. So there's a lot of work to be done, but the exciting thing is that we've already started working on it.
Right.
All the early research indicates that it's going to be the same early adopter cohort, like Ramya said, that it has been overseas, right? So people who are eating meat, trying to reduce their consumption for various reasons, in India, there's more of a guilt associated with meat than there is anywhere else in the world. Maybe now there's a lot of guilt everywhere because of the environmental implications and COVID and everything. But in India, we've had this culturally deep-seated guilt about meat and these issues with meat. So maybe the word flexitarian doesn't apply here as much as like a guilty non-veg might apply, right? So I think that, giving consumers choices that allow them to have their meat during Shravan without feeling guilty about it, or on Tuesdays and Saturdays without feeling guilty about it, would be great. I want to add that, on the farmer side, farmers are both producers as well as consumers. Totally, farmers are people, obviously. One of the things that I've seen from a lot of interaction with farmer groups and governments and a lot of different people is that farmers are very, very, very focused right now on thinking through like where their value chain leads. You can't tell a farmer to switch over from rice or sugarcane to millets without having a buyer for those millets. There's no point.
Of course.
And so we'd love for our industry to offer that high value end product that can deliver that earning and that value to the farmer so that they can switch over to more sustainable crops, and the consumer can also win because they get a high diversity of products. One great example of a place doing this is Canada, where they're investing at the federal and the state level in plant protein processing. So their farmers right there are getting compensated much better for the crops. We really need to do that in India. We really need to get there over time.
And I mean, what has been the government support been like here? Because, I was actually going to ask you that I have heard about Canada and Germany, etc., where the government support is in millions of dollars being invested in research. And, what's sort of happening and what's the scenario in India looking like?
Canada, Singapore, hundreds of millions of dollars, not just millions, right? And in India, it's early days. I think that obviously during this year as well, we're grappling with COVID-19, and that takes a huge effort from the government, from civil society, and everyone together. But the good thing is this ticks boxes, and I think that the incentives align for government. Governments care about climate change. India has taken actually a very vocal leadership role in saying that we want to, for example, eliminate single-use plastics, right, which is analogous in some way to this. We want to adhere to the Paris Climate Agreement. And we won't unless we move over to more sustainable farming, as well as stave off the eventual risk of things like industrial animal farming. So we think that there'll be a lot more that's coming out soon. Early successes have been, investment in some research at the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad, which we stewarded the project. And at the time, it was the largest grant anywhere in the world for cell-based meat. We also have an agreement to set up a research center with Institute of Chemical Technology, Mumbai, also kind of blessed by the government. And, as we get over the hump of COVID-19, we'll be taking that forward as well. Also, again, a unique agreement to do this anywhere in the world. So I think we have led the way in some ways, and we'll continue to kind of work in partnership with various governments to take things forward.
And what's the regulatory process like? Because obviously this is new territory, especially when it comes to cell-based protein. And so, you mentioned right at the beginning that, it's easier to get approvals for plant-based at the moment. But, how has that been for you all in terms of trying to sort of educate the regulatory authorities and also have, sort of regulation in place to sort of monitor this process and, give the consumer that comfort that, this is okay?
So with cell-based meat, given that it's going to take about 3 to 7 years from now to get to price parity with conventional meat, that is going to probably be the blocker in India, is getting it to a point where, a wide group of people can eat it. And so that, I think, is going to be the focus. And the great thing is it's on a trajectory to do that. If it stays on the same trajectory, it will get there, right? So the blocker is not going to be regulatory. Within that time frame, also, several other governments will create a framework so it can come to market. And this has happened, with any food throughout history. So, for example, with anything at all, there's always been this idea of novelty and novel foods that have a specific path to market, and you have to label them a specific way. And it's not just the framework of how it comes to market, it's also the name. So, for example, avocados used to be called alligator pears in California. And there was a very deliberate move by avocado growers or alligator pear growers to change the name to avocado. And there was this big debate at the time, in the 1930s, where it was the name alligator pear is ruining our prospects to create this.
I did not know that. That is...
Yeah. Naming, honestly, so this has been throughout history. There have always been these things where, the naming of something is very, very important. So I think that there's going to be a lot of movement on that front. And I think it's an active conversation. It'll take a couple of years to get moving.
But do you see, do you see the current products that are available in the rest of the world being imported into India? So even though manufacturing in India might take time, whether the market will have access to that product locally?
Yes and no, actually. I think people, especially in really advanced areas like cell-based meat, will look at Indian manufacturers, particularly coming from the pharmaceutical side, as being really viable partners, even if they don't want to sell locally into the Indian market initially. In fact, what needs to happen to drive that cost down over the next 3 to 7 years is stuff like that. So, partnering with, let's say, a Serum Institute of India, which is a fantastic vaccine manufacturer and has done a lot to advance the state of that globally, to create maybe a special vehicle that could be a joint venture that could manufacture cell-based meat over time, bring all of their expertise to the table. They could drive down the cost globally. So that's a huge opportunity here in India, right? So it's not just, I understand, of course, what we're talking about broadly is consumers and getting them great tasting foods that allow them to reduce their footprint on the planet. But this is also something that can create a lot of economic activity and jobs in India.
Sure. No, but what I mean is getting the existing product that is available currently, say in the US or Singapore, being imported into India in its current form. Is that something that's likely to happen sooner, because obviously the local manufacturing might still take a while, a few more years?
Yeah, and that's the no piece of it, because so the yes piece of it was, we should manufacture locally here, even if it's not for local consumption. The no piece of it is, I think it will happen, especially on the plant-based side. You will see products getting imported, distributed in India, but I think they will be priced out for most people. They will be quite high priced, because we do have an import regime that's quite unforgiving, protectionist, or whatever you want to call it, right? So people aren't necessarily going to buy a product for 750 rupees when they could have bought it, the animal equivalent for 100 rupees, right? Or the local Indian competitor for 200 rupees. In fact, I think that this will be great for the local ecosystem, because as these international companies start getting imported into India, it'll create, quote, category awareness. There'll be a bunch of marketing, bunch of coverage.
Exactly. At least you'll have had a taste of the product, sort of metaphorically speaking, even before it starts becoming a larger scale product, domestic product. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, sort of coming back to now that point that you raised earlier about the biryani and, you know, what is the Indian consumer sort of used to in terms of flavor. And I remember this is what we discussed when you invited me to be on your show. You know, we talked about the likelihood of restaurants and chefs adopting this, considering chefs in the US have been seen as trendsetters of consumer preferences. So, you know, I remember we talked about how it may be easier in the US, for instance, to adopt this product as a replacement for the traditional burger. But I, at that time, expressed my reservations about being able to use this in Indian cuisine, you know, which gets so much of its flavor from different parts of the animal. So now I'm going to ask you that question sort of, you know, a year later. You know, how do you see chefs and restaurants in India adopting this product? And you know, I mean, jokes apart, I'm not talking about a restaurant like ours, but, you know, we also have an Indian food delivery brand called Iktara, which is, you know, all about the kebabs and the, you know, the tikkas and, you know, halim and nihari. And, you know, and I've seen, you know, we launched this about 6 months ago. And, you know, I've seen the response. Our top selling item is the mutton biryani. And I know for a fact, I mean, I've eaten biryanis sort of, you know, like all across the country because my husband's a fanatic. There's something about that meat that you know, that really affects the flavor of the biryani. And you cannot deny that, you know, for anything. So how do you see this being addressed, which is almost, you know, I think that when we're talking about India vis-a-vis the US or China or Singapore, this is something that's unique to India. So, you know, I'm going to kind of throw the question you threw at me, you know, back to you is how do you see sort of Indian cuisine adopting this product? And I guess here I'm talking a bit more about the cell-based protein.
I think when we asked you this question, we did not anticipate something like COVID-19. And I guess we should also hear from you about how you're sort of pivoting and changing how you approach the market during the pandemic. But definitely restaurants are not going anywhere. You know, definitely we as a culture love our food. We love trying new food. We've discovered, you know, going out with a gusto, and we're not going to give that up. And, you know, hopefully things get back to normal very soon. And hopefully
I love you for saying that, by the way, especially in the current times.
No, I think it's true. I think we will want to go back to our, I mean, ask anyone what they want to do when the pandemic ends. And the first thing they'll tell you is, I want to eat at this restaurant, and this is what I want to order, and this is how I'm going to eat it. So I think the pathways to the market may not alter drastically. I think retail in combination with food service will be one of the most viable pathways to the early adopter market for sure. I think what we mentioned about imported versus local, you know, products, when you have a local product crafted for a mutton biryani or a halim or a tikka or you know, various kinds of preparations that you have all over the country, the local awareness and taste profile will obviously be that much higher for someone making it within India and crafting it for that consumer who's aware of the difference between a Amritsari fish tikka and a Chettinad fish tikka, right? So I think all those things will come into play. And as far as cell-based goes, we're still a while away, but I think once we launch companies in India, once the costs come down, and once we're able to offer products that taste as good as the real, as animal derived meat, we're going to see it as a high-end preference initially because of the cost barrier. But as those costs also come down, we can obviously, I mean, we asked you this, right? If there was no barrier to it, would you serve yellowfin tuna at your restaurant, which was cell-based? And while you sort of weren't sure at that point, if it costed nearly the same as what you go out to, you know, what you catch in the sea or what you farm in the sea, why wouldn't you try it?
Yeah. I want to address the cell-based thing though, because so the question also was about flavor. It wasn't just about.
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, what I'm getting at is that there's a lot of flavor derived from the bone, from like marrow, from like, you know, and I remember we talked about like a Wagyu steak, which, you know, is like known because of it's the treatment of the animal and therefore the meat being far superior to, you know, to other kind of beef. So there's something in it which, you know, I guess the point is that do we see the science and the technology behind this, being as advanced as being able to replicate that, to the point where people can switch to it, sort of cost apart.
For sure. Yeah. And the thing to remember about cell-based meat specifically is like we're so in the infancy of it, and it's like talking in the 1970s and saying, will we be able to record our podcast over Zoom in 2020, right? Like, it's not the point that I'm trying to make is not that it's 50 years away. The point that I'm trying to make is that we're seeing stuff on the horizon that will happen. In fact, it has an accelerated path to market because of everything else that's happened in biomedicine and in food, etc. So, for example, a lot of the flavor that's inside anything, that's inside meat or inside anything, is like amino acids, phospholipids, these kinds of things that, as Ramya mentioned earlier, those things aren't on the label, right? But that's what cells do. They create these molecules that are flavor molecules. They're volatile molecules. They essentially evaporate off, or when they enter your retronasal passages, they give you a specific blend of a cocktail of certain things that give you the taste of a strawberry, because nothing, quote, tastes like a strawberry. It smells like a strawberry. It has these volatile compounds in it. It has that interaction of salt, acid on your tongue, and then it goes to the back and you see the retronasal passages lighting up. And so there's a lot going on. The great thing about cells is they do that. They express those things. They give you those things, those flavor molecules. And a lot of things that are already manufactured in a similar process can be done here. So, for example, we get a lot of amino acids already in an industrial scale process that looks very similar to what cell-based meat will look like at industrial scale. Right. So I think it's going to be a combination of those food grade things that are already manufactured in a certain way being added in, and also the cells themselves express a lot of these things. Which is, again, part of the reason that you can't eat something that you would be allergic to, because the cells are doing exactly what they would do inside the body.
Yeah.
And I think Varun mentioned this on our podcast as well, where, the end goal for cell-based or cultivated meat, as we call it, is that you could have bluefin tuna for everybody. You could have Wagyu beef for everybody. And that's the kind of end goal that's possible that would take you from sort of scarcity to abundance.
Yeah. Well, that's, it's amazing. I mean, it's an amazing sort of direction that I guess food technology is taking, food science is taking. And it kind of sort of bring this to kind of summarize it the way I'm seeing it, is that it's not just a new craze in the market. It is something that's very much here to stay and is going to become a larger part of our, diet in the long term. And, there's sort of this myth that it's all a bit trendy amongst the young and the millennial, and it's sort of a vegan fad. And I think that what I'm hearing from you today is that this is much larger than all of that. And while yes, the older generation might still be cynical about this, but this is very much here to stay, in the path that the direction that food is going to be heading in. So it's better that people kind of start learning about it and maybe sort of thinking about it a bit more seriously, and whether it's for the environmental purposes or health purposes or whatever. So really interesting development, I feel, from the last time I spoke to you. I think that just watching what's happening around the world with how this is progressing, and now even in India with people investing in this in this sort of space is it's definitely an eye opener for me. So very excited about this. So I'm going to kind of now catch you both off this topic and ask you a few rapid fire questions, completely not to do with this. What's your comfort food, something that you can eat every day? So Ramya, you go first, and then Varun.
Hey Ramya, you're on mute.
Dosa with archivita sambar.
Okay, and we're going to see this in a plant-based form very soon. I mean, in whatever. Varun, what about you?
So dosa, my family makes dosa at home.
You can't say dosa.
No, but I'm going to change my answer. Okay. Right? It's up to something that I make very regularly. It's very boring, but a very awesome thing. A peanut butter and banana sandwich. It's so good. I'm so obsessed with peanut butter, almond butter, all of that stuff. Love it. Make it myself. So much fun and so delicious. Yeah.
Very interesting. Ramya, what's the best book you've read this year?
Oh, hands down, Sujata Gitla's Ants Among Elephants.
And what's it about?
It's amazing. I've been recommended this book by everybody I know, and I got to it very late. She writes about her family history, and her family history just happens to be the history of, the last sort of 100 years in India, especially focusing in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. Her uncle happened to be the guy who sort of led the Naxalite movement in those parts. And she offers an amazing sort of really incisive, really insightful takedown of these sort of people-based movements from a caste perspective, because she writes about her family's Dalit history. So it's just incredible. Wow. It's just written so well. And I was just so moved by that book.
Varun, what about you?
I'm going to do a quick plug for a friend, Dr. Swapnil Parekh, who wrote a book in November or December and got it published on the coronavirus when things were heating up.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's called The Coronavirus. He's writing a second edition right now for the US. He saw this very.
We should have all read that book a little bit.
I'm not the kind of person. I'm trying as much as possible, because there's very little I can do about the situation as an individual, aside from supporting some organizations, etc. I'm trying to read as little as possible about it, except like really, good editorial and well-accredited sources.
Sure.
I'm not following the Twitter about it and all of that stuff. But this book actually helped me get a lot of my anxiety under control, because it arms you with information about what's going on. So I would encourage people to go get it. It's called The Coronavirus by Dr. Swapnil Parekh.
That's going to be a hard one to forget. Ramya, who have been your role models or mentors?
Wow, that's a tough one. It's always been writers for me. It's always been female writers for me. It's like people like Doris Lessing or Margaret Atwood, or, these are the kind of people I looked up to and kind of fangirled about. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I guess, I think everyone has, like, I think my parents are role models and mentors for me in many ways. But yeah, my friends, they're kicking ass. I look up to them.
Okay. Varun?
I have a similar answer. So my parents were basically, keeping me safe, healthy, privileged, like hugely, hugely grateful to them. Learned a lot, whether it was like through active teaching or indirect teaching. But a lot of my personal values were formed by reading, meeting people around the world, etc. So I'm a huge, huge fan of like a Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, who's a professor at Columbia, who's been an absolute stalwart of international development. Same thing with Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee, who brought a lot. They won the Nobel Prize for Economics last year for bringing a lot of measurement to the idea of international development. Just folks who helped me think more systematically about what I want to do with my life and how I want to have impact in the world. Also, Bruce Friedrich, who started the Good Food Institute, has been just fantastic to work with. Really, really great.
I'm sure. Finally, your message to India's youth.
I'm going to take offense at this question because it assumes I'm no longer young.
Of course not. Okay, to your peers, Ramya.
And then I would answer.
Drop your pearls of wisdom on us.
I'm in no position to give a message to my peers because I don't think I know any better than them. But yeah, I think my message is keep the faith.
Varun?
As a very happily decrepit old man, I will offer the words that I think it's more possible now than ever in history to align your life with a true sense of purpose, to work towards things that if you want to make a difference in the world, you can align your career and your life towards those things. And I think that's incredibly exciting. And I hope that everyone has that opportunity.
That's amazing. I completely agree with you as well. So with both of you, actually. And listen, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a fantastic conversation, a real eye-opener for me, and I hope everyone listening as well. And I hope to have lots more conversations about this in the coming months and years. So, and good luck with everything you're doing. Incredible, this is an incredible space to be in. So good luck with it.
Thank you so much.
This was so much fun. Thank you. I guess the next round is on us then.
It is. Thank you. Bye.
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 That was such an inspiring conversation. I really hope you enjoyed tuning in today. And if you like this show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM Podcast Network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or website or wherever else you get your podcasts from. You can also follow us on social media. We're at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm at G Devidayal on Instagram and at Gauri Details on Twitter.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Another fun week in the books last week, and I think you guys should definitely check out some of the shows that we did. So first, let me tell you about Cock and Bull. We did 2 Cock and Bulls on Cyrus Says last week, which is, I don't think we've ever done before. But there was just so much to talk about, and it was fun. The first one was just on Trish, myself, and Cyrus. The second one, we had Abhijit Ganguly on, and that was a great episode. Do check that out. Check out Know Your Kanun as well. It's been a while since I spoke about that show, but Amber's been doing a great job on it. This week he spoke to Naina Sharma, a Canadian lawyer, about the ways that you do business in Canada and the challenges that presents. Definitely very interesting stuff. Do check that out. The guys at Naan Curry are doing some really, really fun stuff. Do check out their latest episode. They talk about roti, the simple bread, but it's got some complications to it. Let them tell you about what they are. Do check that out. Also, do definitely check out the Wire Talks with Siddharth Bhatia. He's been killing it, man. It's just a new show, but what great conversations. This week, he had Siddharth Singh on to talk about pollution. Do check that out. And you know what, guys? The best news of all, Simplified is back. They've been back for a few weeks and I haven't called them out before, but remember that they're back and do check them out. This week, they talk about, does censorship make sense? Knowing the guys, I think I know the answer to that, but you should go check that out. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
पेश खिदमत है आपकी शान में हमारे अंजुमन से. Hi, I am Sadaf.
And I am Arshit. खाने का इतिहास, economics, policy, psychology, सब है मेन्यू पे.
Only on the Naan Curry podcast every Wednesday, सिर्फ IVM podcast ऐप या वेबसाइट पर, या फिर जहां से भी आप अपने पॉडकास्ट सुनते हो.